so today we're going to talk about Germans in America and finding your German ancestors' hometown. I wanted to start just by introducing myself a little bit. Sister Esplin already gave you a little spiel about me, but I thought I'd just kind of tell you how I got into German research and what I'm doing here at BYU. So I am a student. I am graduating in just a few weeks now. I'm very excited. I'm getting my bachelor's degree in family history research, and I particularly love researching German immigrants. I got into German research after I married my husband, Christopher. I had never spoken German, never done any sort of family history in Germany. Before that, when we got married, I learned that he had lots of German immigrants in his family, most of whom lived in Baltimore, Maryland. So I began taking German research classes and language classes so that I could do his family line and research his family line, and I just absolutely loved it. I fell in love with the research and the culture and just being able to trace these German families back to Europe. So I've worked at the library on the German Immigrants in American Church Records project, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And I just hope that I can share some of the knowledge I've gained since starting on this German research journey with you. Germans immigrated to America for a variety of reasons. There was a mixture of tough situations back home and enticing opportunities in the States that might have brought them here. Back in Germany, there were parts of history that were pretty rough at various points. So the earliest German-speaking immigrants came to the US in the 17th century. During the 18th and 19th century, there were huge influxes of migrants at various points, which gradually decreased until the 20th century. So over these centuries, German people were dealing with wars, poor harvests that left them hungry, the chaos of the Industrial Revolution that put a lot of people out of work, and political fragmentation. So additionally, if you were part of a religious minority, you may have faced harassment or persecution. Many Germans were pushed to leave just to find some peace and stability. And then the things that pulled them to America were a lot about a promise for a better life. The US was seen by some as a land of opportunity, especially when it came to owning land. So there was a lot of land to go around, especially when the Homestead Act in 1862 was passed, which basically gave land away to folks who were willing to farm it. This was a huge deal for many Germans who didn't have those same opportunities at home. They may have also come in search of jobs, or they may have been following family members or neighbors who had already settled in the US and who invited them to come with them. There were hundreds of reasons for people to come to the US, and for Germans, these were often multifaceted. They had a lot of different reasons for coming. So then this is some statistics just about immigration since the 1820s. So the 19th and 20th centuries witnessed several distinct waves of German immigration to America. So you can see those waves here. Each was driven by different social, economic, and political factors. The peak of German immigration in the 19th century was in 1882, with almost 250,000 immigrants entering the US that year. They had just gone through some periods of depression and just some economic instability, and that brought people here. So over the 20th century, that number slowly decreased with some short periods of influx, but then continued to decline. I know my chart is a little bit blurry. I couldn't get a great image, but I'll explain just some of the information that's here so you can understand it. So this chart was prepared by the Max Kincaid Institute for German American Studies. There were several factors that you can see influencing the increase or decrease of immigration from Germany to America. Certain events, such as the 1848 revolutions that you can see there, the Franco-Prussian War in 1870s, and the World Wars often saw an increase in migration due to economic difficulties and political conditions in Germany after those wars and events. Some events, like the American Civil War in 1861 and World War, saw a decrease in German immigration during those war years, which isn't super surprising. Not many people would willingly migrate to a country that is experiencing civil war or who is heavily involved in a large war like the World War. So there was a huge decrease immigration during those times. But that's just kind of so you can see when these people were coming to the US and maybe where your ancestor may have fit in there. And then this map was created by the United States Census Bureau. It's using an American Community Survey from 2010 to 2014. So the survey asked which people claimed German ancestry. So it was asking if there were people in certain areas who had German ancestors. So you can see that the areas with the largest population of people with German ancestry was in the Midwest, which is not surprising. That is where many of the German immigrants went to once they arrived in the US. I wanted to just place this here so you could visualize a little bit better where most of the Germans congregated, where most of these immigrants congregated. Popular areas for Germans to settle were like Wisconsin, Illinois, Missouri, and Ohio. A lot of people talk about how they settled within the German Triangle, and the triangle includes Cincinnati, Milwaukee, and St. Louis. So that's an area where there were a lot of German immigrants, but you can see that there's Germans all over this map in various areas of the US. German territory has undergone some pretty significant changes over time, so much so that I definitely couldn't fit it all into this presentation. I'm going to just kind of give you a real quick spiel about the basics that you need to know. So for centuries, the lands inhabited by German-speaking peoples were part of the Holy Roman Empire, a decentralized entity composed of numerous states, principalities, and territories. However, the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806 during the Napoleonic Wars was a turning point. Prior to this, there was no unified German state, and the concept of a cohesive German empire really had yet to materialize. And it really wasn't until 1871 that the modern German Empire under Chancellor Otto von Bismarck was established through a series of diplomatic and military maneuvers. So we start to get kind of a resemblance, more of a resemblance to what we know of Germany today, as Germany today. This is a map from the David Rumsey map collection of the German Empire. So this is after the unification of Germany. Before German unification, some of the major political units you might see listed in records might include things like Prussia, Bavaria, Saxony, some of these more independent units, and the list goes on. Many of these became part of the German Empire after unification. So since German unification, this map of the German territory, which from 1901, has still undergone numerous transformation. Wars like World War I and World War II led to the acquisition and loss of territory at various times. So there's been a lot of reshaping the boundaries and political landscape of Germany over and over and over again. So why does all of this history matter? Why do we need to know this? So I want you to know this just because determining an ancestor's hometown in Germany can be especially challenging due to the historical complexities of territorial boundaries in this area of Europe. So different areas of Western and Eastern Europe have been considered part of Germany at various points in history, and jurisdictional changes over time further complicate the matter. So depending on when your ancestors arrived in the United States, Germany may have looked completely different from what it is now. What may have been considered German territory in the past may now be part of a different country, making it difficult to ascertain where your ancestor lived. Also, administrative changes within Germany itself, like the restructuring of states and provinces, adds another layer of complexity to the research process. As a result, simply knowing that an ancestor was from Germany is often not enough to trace their origins accurately. But it is possible, and we're going to talk about that. Don't lose hope. If most of your research experience is in the US, this may be kind of a foreign concept for some people. Why determining where your ancestor's hometown is matters. Like I said, there's lots of jurisdictional changes. We have a lot of records in the US, especially records that have been indexed and are easily searchable if you just have a name and maybe a date. You can often find records in the US without knowing the hometown of your ancestor. This isn't the case when you're trying to trace your German immigrant ancestors back to Germany. The hometown is very crucial to tracing their roots, and I'm going to give you just 3 reasons why this is the case. So the first is that we want to avoid common name confusion. So in German records, it's pretty common for lots of people to share similar surnames and first names. It's not uncommon to encounter individuals with identical or similar names. There were lots of names that were reused over and over and over again. So as you can see from my screenshot, I've just searched Johann Schneider in Ancestry, both of which are fairly common names in Germany. And this yielded a result of 783,666 results. So you probably don't want to sort through all of those records. I definitely wouldn't. It would take hours and hours. And this just kind of shows how they reuse the same name frequently. So this can pose challenges for genealogical research as you're distinguishing between individuals with the same name. And it can be close to impossible if you don't have the hometown and know where your ancestor lived. So in order to find the records of your ancestors in Germany and to avoid confusion with other Germans of the same name, you should know their hometown. It will just help you distinguish. It's one of those key pieces of distinguishing information to sort between people with the same name. The next thing is accessing records. So when you're tracing your family history, this is the key to unlocking records in Germany. So there's not a single massive archive or database where lots of German records are housed. A lot of them are all over the place in different databases, or they may not even be online. Local records like birth and marriage certificates are usually organized by town or parish. And so having that specific location information will allow you to look at those specific records. So here's kind of the catch. Many German records haven't been indexed yet. So you may need to dig a little deeper into unindexed records, searching, page by page or image by image, or you may even, depending on where your ancestors live, have to reach out to local archives for help to do on-site research. So to do that, you will need to know exactly where your ancestors lived so you can figure out what collections you need to look at. Additionally, just understanding geographical boundaries is crucial as territorial changes over time may affect where records are housed. So if you know that your ancestor's hometown was in a particular area that maybe isn't part of Germany anymore, or maybe there were various jurisdictional changes over time, so they were owned by different countries or provinces, those records may have been moved around. So that's something that you will want to know so you can research that and find out where those records are. And then the next one, I just think finding your ancestor's hometown also kind of allows you just to see the world more as they saw it. It gives you a lot of historical context and cultural information about where they were. So what were the social and economic conditions? What was the town like? What kinds of conditions may have influenced their lifestyle choices? So it's just a contextual backdrop that can really, I think, just enrich your understanding and make their stories come alive. So moving on, migration also plays a significant role in our German genealogical journey. A lot of times whole towns or congregations or families would move together. So this can kind of help you understand, were they part of a larger wave of immigrants? Were they moving with neighbors? That kind of thing. Understanding these patterns can just help you see your ancestors not just as individuals, but part of this larger historical narrative. Next, connecting with relatives. You may be able to, if you discover your ancestor's hometown, could lead you to long lost relatives that are still living in the area, or people who are also doing research in the same town or same area. There's lots of resources online to connect with people like over Facebook and different groups like that do research in specific places that might help you discover some relatives that you didn't know existed. Lastly, just by understanding the hometowns of our ancestors, you can gain insight into the traditions and languages and dialects that influence their lives. Each region of Germany has a unique dialect and traditions, and they have been passed down through generations. So knowing those can give us just a greater appreciation of our cultural heritage and a deeper sense of belonging and understanding of who our ancestors were. So I'm going to start now just talking about some resources that you can use to find the name of the hometown for your ancestor. I'll talk about specific record types, genealogical record types, a little bit later. But I wanted to mention that before you do anything and dive headfirst into a ton of different records, I want you to look at this book series. This is the German Immigrants in American Church Records series. These books can save you hours and hours and hours of research if they contain the name of your German ancestors. This was a project that was started by Dr. Roger Miner in the early 2000s, and it is a great resource for anyone who has German ancestors living in the US. In the US, it was common for German immigrants to attend a church that was conducted primarily in German, or at least contained a majority German members. So the records they kept in these churches were often written in German, and information about each person's hometown may have been recorded. So these books that Dr. Miner has compiled, and I've helped work on this project a little bit, they compile vital information about your ancestors, so birth, marriage, and death information, as well as any other details that we think might be relevant to your search. Some of the records that are compiled are available online that these books have used. However, many of them are not, and the information they may have extracted from records may only be available on site in archives. So you may not have access to those records, but you can look in these books and see if we've indexed anything. The compilers of these books extract as much helpful information as they can. So I talked about the birth, marriage, and death. It might include military information. And if the hometown of your ancestor is listed in a record that they extract, it will be listed in these books. You can kind of see what we do just looking at this slide. So up top here is an example of a record we might look at. And then the bottom is an example of how that would look in our compiled books. So it's just a bunch of information that you can then look at and see if we've listed anything helpful about your ancestor. So there are currently 40 volumes in this series, and they are organized by state. Each volume has an index of the names that are listed in the back. So start by looking in volumes of the states where your ancestors may have lived, and then check the index in the back to see if your ancestor is listed there. If you're looking for a female, we will, if it's available in the records and it tells us, we will list them by both their married and maiden names. So check under both surnames if you're looking for a female ancestor. This is a map just showing you which volumes have currently extracted church information from which state. So we currently have 40 volumes. This one's a little outdated. It only has 39, but the 40th is in Texas. But just know that if your German ancestor came from a state that is not listed here, hang tight. It's an ongoing project. And if the state's not listed right now, it may be in the future. But if you have an ancestor from one of these states, especially in the Midwest, then they may be listed in these books. You can determine which volumes correspond with which state by visiting the project's website, and I'll have a link for that in the next slide. They have an index that's organized by state, so you can check and see if your state is listed, and then you can see a list of which churches they have extracted information from. This can help you determine which volume you need to look at. So some states, like Wisconsin and Iowa, have multiple volumes of extracted data, just because there's so many German immigrants there. So you might want to look and see if there were any churches listed in these index that are close to the area that your ancestors lived, if you're curious. Here's a QR code. I'll leave this up just for a second. This will link you to the project's website. So if you'd like to access that index or learn more about the project, you can just scan this QR code. How do you access these books? So unfortunately, we only have print version of this information right now, the books. So common places that I see people accessing these books are in the Family Search Library in Salt Lake or at the BYU Provo Library. Check your local library as well, see if they have copies. If you don't live close to these areas, one option you have is to find an acquaintance or somebody who lives nearby, or maybe even hire somebody to go look at these books for you. There is also another option. You can buy a printed copy of the volume that you want to look in. They are a bit pricey though, so it may be more of an affordable option to find somebody else or to go look at them yourself in the library if you'd like to see it. And I would only recommend buying it if you know that one of the record sets came from your ancestors' church. Because even if you buy one of the books from a state that your ancestor lived in, they might not have indexed records that included your ancestor. So once you've done that, still haven't found anything, these are the sources that you should be looking in. These aren't necessarily the only records you can use, but they're some of the most common and helpful. So we're going to go through each of these things and just talk about why they're useful and what you can expect from them. One of the things that all genealogists and anyone who is getting into family history should do is a preliminary survey. So the preliminary survey is just a practice that allows you to do some preliminary research before you dive into records. So whether it's in America or Europe or somewhere else, I think everybody should do this no matter what they are researching. But it's particularly helpful when you're searching for your German ancestors' hometown. And I'll just kind of discuss each of these 4 steps and how they might be beneficial to you. So the first is home and family resources. So there are so many things that your family may have preserved or kept that can help you determine an ancestor's place of origin. It might include journals, letters, military memorabilia, family Bibles, photos, so much more. I'm sure you've all seen, somebody's house that looks like this, that just has records and boxes in a basement or an attic. Before you start researching online, just try looking in your grandma's basement or in your mom's attic, okay? I'm always so surprised at the things people can find just in their family members' homes. So search there first with things that you've got access to, okay? The next thing, it's wise, I think it's very wise to begin your genealogy where many family histories start with your family, right? Start by learning as much as you can just from your family members. You might have relatives that can give you the information you need. You just need to ask the right questions. So when preparing to interview your relatives, consider their personal experiences and consider historical context. You should be tailoring your questions to bring out some of these detailed memories and stories. Don't underestimate the depth of information that can be gleaned from your aunts, uncles, grandparents, great-grandparents, or distant relatives, right? There are many guides for how to interview your relatives if you have questions about how to do that. This list of questions came directly from the Family Search Research Wiki under the title Germany Finding Town of Origin. I would highly recommend that you ask a variation of these questions, and that might lead you to a direction about where your ancestors came from. I would also recommend that you record these interviews if you can using audio or video. That will help you keep the details straight, and it'll just preserve the stories that you uncover. So just make sure everything's organized, documented when you're doing this. It can be really easy when you're having a conversation to forget some of the things that your family members have told you, and going back, something may stick out to you later on that didn't before you started your research. So keep those conversations going, and keep them relevant. Next, search electronic databases. So check online just to see if anyone else has done the research before you. Work smarter, not harder, right? Before you put in the work, see if somebody has graciously shared their research online. There are lots of online trees nowadays, lots of websites you can go to. Some of the most popular that you should absolutely check are Family Search, Ancestry, and MyHeritage. I'm sure a lot of you have used those before. I do want to just caution you that well-meaning people make mistakes on these websites. So any information that you find on an online database, you should verify against actual records, but it may be a good starting point. There are some specialized databases for various groups of people. Just do your research, Google, and see if there are any databases that will be helpful to you. And I'm going to give you an example of that in this next slide. So this is an example of an online database that I recently found for the Lange family that I was researching. So this is an example of an online database that is just very, very specialized. So this particular family were active members of the Hanseatic League, which is like a merchant guild based out of Germany. And they spent a lot of their time in Norway. So this website is dedicated to recording the genealogy of members of the Hanseatic League in Norway, which was an amazing find for me. I found this just after searching on Google for members of the Hanseatic League. So just don't underestimate the value of a few Google searches before you begin. You can see this particular website was very valuable. It has the names, birth, marriage, and death information of each family member. There was so much information already compiled for me. So again, I had to go through and verify this information, but it was so helpful just to have some of these dates and places already researched by somebody else. The next part of the preliminary survey is family surname histories and biographies. So this is a book just an example of a book that I found on the Internet Archive database. It's a wonderful database. There's lots of large databases like WorldCat or HathiTrust or ProQuest, so many different places you can search for in large collections of books. So this particular website is great for finding old family history books. I would also recommend that you look in local libraries and archives for the areas you are searching. The Family Search Library and BYU Library also have extensive family history collections. As you can see, like this would be really helpful if you had Pennsylvania German ancestors. So that's an example. I also want to just highlight county histories. That's not necessarily part of the preliminary survey, but I think they're also very helpful. It was a fairly common practice for counties in the US to create books about their history. These often contain information about residents of the counties. So I would highly recommend that you search for county histories in addition to family histories and biographies if you can. As with family histories and biographies, check with local resources as well as larger archives to find county histories. This one's wonderful. It has Germans in Marion County, Ohio. If you had ancestors from this area, this might be a book that you wanted to look and see if there was information about your ancestors there. The next thing we're going to talk about is church records. So moving on from the preliminary survey, church records are very, very helpful. One of the reasons they're helpful is because church records often begin much earlier than vital records. So vital records being government required birth, marriage, and death records. They often didn't start until the late 1800s or early 1900s in the US. And so when you are wanting to find birth, marriage, and death information for your immigrant ancestors, if they were alive before this point, church records are key to that. Additionally, they're often written in German. A lot of people were part of communities of Germans and they had their own churches. They often list the name of the person's hometown because of this. There were a lot more people who were familiar with the different regions and hometowns in Germany. And there are a variety of records that can be helpful to you. Some of those that I found most helpful are marriage and children's birth records. So marriage records, if you had German ancestors that were young, unmarried, and came to the US and then married here, they will often list the places they were born. Children's birth records. So if you had some ancestors that came and had a child, that child's birth record or their baptism record really will likely list their parents' information along with their parents' birthplaces. So here's just an example of a church record that may be helpful. So this is a baptismal record for Anna Augusta Maria Hartung. So this is an example from the 1850s in Milwaukee. You can see it's written in German. And if you have never learned German before, in a little bit, we'll discuss some resources to help you read the records. But for now, I just want to point out a few things to you so you can understand why these records are so helpful. So if you look at my little arrow here, it's pointing to the word aus. This is the German word that means like from. So this is likely denoting the hometown of the person who comes in this record. This aus comes after the name Karl Moritz Hartung, you can see there, and that is the father of the child who is being baptized. So after the word aus is a place name. It reads Naumburg, Saxon, PR, which stands for Preußen, or what we call Prussia in English. So there you go. You've got the hometown of Karl, which is so helpful, and we'll be able to get you back to Germany and into the records in Germany. So that's one example. Vital records. Again, I just wanted to clarify before starting with vital records, the difference between vital records and church records. Vital records are government issued records, and they're generated by federal, state, or local governments. And they might contain different information from a church record. So starting with birth records, these aren't just about when and where our ancestors were born. They also often include parents' details too. So birth records, if you look at birth records for children who are born in the US but are born to German parents, it can help you find that information about their parents' birthplaces. So that might be something you consider. Moving on to death records. These documents are packed with useful information. So beyond the basics of the deceased's information, they, again, also frequently list parents' names and sometimes the parents' places of birth. So This is helpful if your ancestors moved away from Germany and they died in the US. It can also help you connect the dots with their parents and where they originated. Lastly, marriage records can be just as revealing. They usually have the names of the bride and the groom and their birthplaces. So just some direct information about the bride and the groom that can be helpful to you. Here's an example, a marriage registration record. So this example depicts a record from Wisconsin. You can see that this is a record for Karl Wilhelm Zeller and Emma Bechtel. So unlike the church records, these records are usually in English, which is helpful, especially if you don't have much experience reading and interpreting German records. There's a lot of information in this record. The first 5 lines in this record list Karl's parents, his occupation, his current residence, and then line 6, where my arrow is pointing, that is what we were interested in, right? It lists the birthplace, his birthplace, and it's Stuttgart, Württemberg, Germany, okay? So that's another place that you might be able to find the hometown of your German ancestor. Census records are another type of document that governments use to collect information about the populations that were living in their countries. So in the US, this information typically includes details like the number of people living in a household, their ages, occupations, and their birthplaces. In the US, census records are collected every 10 years, and most, if not all, are indexed and searchable online on websites like Ancestry and Family Search. The 2020 census was just taken 4 years ago. I had a man come to my door who looked kind of like this. It was a little bit awkward, but he just asked me questions about myself that they needed for the census. And as a genealogist, I'm so grateful for these people because they are so helpful for genealogical research. Census records are often the first records genealogists use to do American research, just because they contain so much information and because they occur every 10 years. So they just give you a snapshot every 10 years of your ancestor's life. The US began taking the federal census in 1790, but it wasn't until 1850 that the census lists each member of the household and their birthplace, okay? So before that, you might not find a lot of helpful information. So often the birthplace that was listed may have just been a country or a state. So again, might not always be helpful, but every once in a while, census enumerators may have listed a more specific area, okay? So this is an example. This is the 1920 US Census, and for this one, I was interested in Augusta Manka, who is a maid. This census includes citizenship information, which is really helpful with immigrant ancestors. So if you look at that first arrow that's on the left, you'll see that it's pointing to her year of immigration in 1914. It also lists her place of birth, and that's that second arrow, and it's listed as Dresden, Saxony. So once again, this record has given us some very helpful information about our ancestors' hometown. Next thing we're going to talk about is naturalization and immigration records. So naturalization records are documents that signify a person's official grant of citizenship in a country where they're born. Naturalization records are very valuable resources for genealogical research about immigrants because they provide a lot of detailed personal information about that person's origins, their movements, and their life in their new country. Before 1906, naturalization forms differed depending on where they were being recorded. And then after 1906, we see a little bit more standardization. So before 1906, it likely contains the name of the immigrant, residence of the immigrant, and the country of origin, as well as maybe some other information. After 1906, it will also include their date of arrival in the country, the port they came to, and the ship they arrived on, and the birthplace of the immigrant. Additionally, you can look at passport records. So a passport primarily served just as a travel document, and it was issued by a country's government, and it just certified the holder's identity and nationality for the purpose of international travel. So similar to modern passports, they often included personal information such as a holder's name, date of birth, and even a physical description or a photograph. So we're going to look first at a naturalization record. So naturalization occurred in 3 different stages, and therefore generated 3 different kinds of records. So there was the Declaration of Intention, the petition, and the Certificate of Naturalization. All of those can be helpful. I'm going to show you, I think the declarations of intention are very, very helpful. So that's why I brought this. particular example from 1921. You can notice that this record contains tons of valuable information about Maria Luisa Weibler. It lists her age, occupation, and physical description. And if you look at the line where my arrow is pointing, you will also notice that it lists her birth information. And that is the information we're looking for. It says she was born in a place called Betzingen, Germany. Passports. I also wanted to show you how helpful passport applications can be. This application from the 1920s lists my ancestor Tekla Radulovic. Kind of a funny little tangent just because I like to share about my family. My name, Emma Ruddy, would have been Radulovic if Tekla and her husband Christopher had not changed their names. I don't know. I think it would have been kind of fun to have that name, but that's okay. Not quite sure why they changed that, but I have some fun documents recording their name change in local court records in Baltimore. But sorry, back to the document. As you can see, one of the first lines lists where she was born in Burgstadt, Germany. This passport also lists where she was born, her husband's name, and his immigration information and how long he had lived in the United States. Very, very helpful when you're trying to trace people back to Germany. It has tons of information. So if your ancestors traveled, that may be something that you want to look into. Next, we're going to talk about ship's passenger lists. So ship's passenger lists are records of the people who traveled on ocean-going ships. Typically, these were lists created by the ship's captain or shipping line, and they contain information about the passengers aboard for a specific voyage. So the details in these lists can vary, but they usually include names, ages, genders, nationalities, occupations, and destinations, and places of origin. So all of those things. There are some instances of passenger lists before 1820 for immigrants to the US, but they're pretty rare. After 1820, the list became a part of the administrative requirements for entry into the US. And they were used to enforce various immigration and passenger laws over the years. These lists are becoming increasingly available through online genealogy platforms. Ancestry has a ton that they have indexed and digitized online. This is just one example. This is a New Orleans passenger list for Carl Johann Balthasar Lütgen. It lists the hometown of every single passenger on board. So if you look at my arrow, you can see that his place of birth is listed as Stuttgart. And it also lists information just generally that might be helpful to you about his nationality or his occupation and that kind of thing. So very helpful passenger lists. This is another passenger list. This is one of my ancestors, Andreas Stetka. In the second column of this ship passenger list, you can see him. Or sorry, you can see the hometown of each passenger listed. He's in the third column down, but his hometown is listed here. I know it says DO, where his hometown should be listed. That's just an abbreviation for ditto, meaning same as above. So you look above and it says Eichenfeld, Preußen is where he came from. So then you would be able to go to that particular town and see where he was coming from. One of the last ones I wanted to talk about is newspapers. So newspapers serve as a really important resource in genealogical research for uncovering hometowns of German ancestors. They offer just a unique window into the past and just have a wealth of information from personal details about individuals and families and just their birth, marriage, death information. It might include tons of information. So these can be announcements for weddings, obituaries, social gatherings. I found, for example, a newspaper record for my ancestors about a birthday party they had. It might include legal notices. So newspapers can reveal just tons of clues about an ancestor's place of origin and their migration patterns. Particularly, I wanted to highlight obituaries because I think most people are familiar with obituaries and there's a lot of resources out there for you to be able to find obituaries. People have compiled information about obituaries from different states and cities, counties. So obituaries don't have any specific format, but they do often mention where the deceased was born. So you can see in this obituary for an immigrant who was a clergyman, Father Denk, it lists his birthplace as Regensburg, Bavaria, or Regensburg, sorry, yes, Regensburg, Bavaria. So it contains lots of great information, also just about his early childhood and education in his last months of life. But If you're looking for the hometown, this is a great place to look. Here's just another great example. This is why it's so important to research large families in general. Don't just focus on one specific person, but research families together, a lot of different family members together. One thing that obituaries almost always include is the survivors of the person who is deceased. So sometimes they might even list their residence. Hypothetically, if you were researching this man, Joseph Pregler, his sister's obituary may be a good place to find his residence. So if you look at the arrow here, you can see that he was living in Regensburg at the time of his sister's death. So again, very helpful. It gives you a place to look back to, and it also lists that that is where his sister was born. So that's another thing you could look at. You found the town name, but now you can't figure out where it is, or you can't read it, okay? This is a common issue. Often families will be able to find the town name of their ancestor, but determining where that is in modern Germany can be a challenge. Sometimes you know that the town name is listed in a record, but it's hard to read and you can't really quite decipher what it is. So over the next few slides, we're just going to talk about a couple of tools that you can use to decipher town names, determine where they're at. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of these sources. It's not going to be comprehensive. So if you need deeper instruction, there are lots of videos online and a lot of people at the BYU library who can kind of give you a little bit more help with these resources. So the Myers Gazetteer is one of the most valuable sources in German immigration research. So this gazetteer is valuable because of its detailed listings of places in the German Empire, which today would include parts of Germany, Poland, France, Denmark, Lithuania, so all sorts of places in Europe. For each entry, the gazetteer provides lots of details like the location name, administrative divisions like state, province, region, details about the local churches, including like denominations and parishes that were in that area. It'll give you jurisdictional information like the local court and higher regional courts, population statistics, distances and relationships to other nearby places, just tons of information. So this level of detail makes the Myers Gazetteer just incredibly valuable for historians and genealogists who are trying to trace their roots back to the German Empire, okay? This is what it looks like after you have done a search. So I was searching for Americhenhain, and you can see that it pulled it up. One of the features that's very helpful in the Myers Gazetteer is if you're struggling to read part of a place name, but you can read some of it, you can replace any parts of the town name you're looking for with an asterisk, and it will search for any possible options that are available to you. So for this one, I added an asterisk after American, just as an example of if you couldn't read the last four letters of the word. And the only option that I was given was Americhenhain. So at that point, I would look and see if that option seemed correct with the record I was looking at. Once you click on it, on an entry, this is the screen that will pull up. You can see the original entry listed on the left in Fraktur script. So this particular gazetteer was compiled in the early 1900s, I believe, in a print form. So they have that original print form right there on the left. And then they also have it indexed and listed on the right side in a typed format. So that will include jurisdictional information such as the province, registration offices, military offices, etc. If you look at the gray bar at the top, you can also look at the original maps from the gazetteer. You can look at ecclesiastical information. So it'll tell you if there were Lutheran or Catholic churches in the area. And it will also just tell you about related towns and places around Americhenhain. If you select the map option, it'll pull up the old maps from the old gazetteers, which is shown on the left. And if you zoom in on this map, it will also pull up a modern map, so you can see where it would be on our maps today. So super helpful if you're wanting to learn where your ancestors live. If you suspect that your ancestor is Austrian or Czech or Slovakian or Slovenian, you can also check the Gen Team Gazetteer. You will need to create a free account in order to access the information on this site. But once you have logged in, you will click Gazetteer on the left-hand side there. I don't know if you can see that, but it just says Gazetteer. You can then search based on the different filters it has here. So contains, start with, or a direct search for the exact information you put in. So it'll pull up a list of former and current place names in those areas that you can choose from. If you click on one of those names, it will then pull up a screen that shows you the information they have about that place. It's not quite as detailed as Myers Gazetteer, but it's still very helpful. You can see that the parish name is listed at the bottom along with archive information, and that could give you a lot of information about where to start looking for records. So also just don't underestimate the power of Google Maps and Wikipedia. If you're having a hard time finding a place, just try looking on Google Maps or Wikipedia, and they may have some basic information for you. Many of the records, especially church records, you might be looking at, even though they're in the US, will be partially or entirely written in German. Often it will be written using Gothic letters or some more archaic forms of writing. So you might not be familiar with that. One of the resources you should be aware of is BYU script tutorials. So to access this, just Google BYU script tutorials. It should take you straight to their website. This website will give you tips, tricks, and practice in reading German handwriting and documents. So it has interactive exercise as well as alphabet charts, common German vocabulary lists, and just additional resources to help you get into reading those German documents. So if you're struggling to read documents in the handwriting in German, visit this website. It's so helpful. I also just want to highlight the Family Search Wiki. It's amazing. This should be one of the first resources you consult as well if you have questions about, well, really anything. It's a free access online encyclopedia on the Family Search website. Here's just an example of one of the pages you can look at. It's called Germany Jurisdictions, and you can see that it kind of gives you a breakdown of different eras in German history, and you can look at jurisdictions in those. So if you scroll down on that page, there's a list of German jurisdictions, which might be helpful to you if you have questions about the place in Germany or the hometown name that you found. Super helpful. You can also research more specific locations. So like this is an article on the Family Search Wiki about the province of Brandenburg. It may include links on the right-hand side. You can see those there to resources regarding church records or other helpful resources in the area you're researching. They also have lists of German genealogical words and their translations that might be helpful for you, as well as help you find resources. You can also use this for the US. So if you are trying to find out if there are newspaper records or church records in a specific state or town in the US, you can also look that up here, and it will give you often links to those record sets. And then what are the next steps? So you found the hometown. What do you do next? And I would love to sit here today and show you how to do research in Germany. Unfortunately, that would take a lot longer than we have time for. So I just wanted to end by giving you some resources that will help you learn how to do that research in Germany, just so I'm not leaving you hanging. There are so many resources available to you online, so don't let a lack of knowledge stop you from actually going and doing German research. There are a lot of ways for you to learn about doing research in Germany online. Here are 6 that I want to mention. Roots Tech, which is a genealogy conference held every year in Salt Lake, posts many of their presentations and courses online for free. Okay, so look up Roots Tech. That is a wonderful website. I love that Sister Esplin was just mentioning that they have consultants at the center before my presentation, but these missionaries who work at the center are wonderful. So at the BYU library, you can get a free consultation and help with your family history online or in person. So definitely look into that if you have questions and you want just some of that personal interaction with somebody who can help you. The Family History Guide is a free website online that gives you resources and instructions on how to do research, often step by step. Their guides include handouts, links, videos, and lots of other resources that can be helpful to you. We've also already discussed the Family Search Wiki, but definitely I just want to stress that is a wonderful resource for you. There are also a variety of courses you can take online and in person. Just research and see if there are any courses that might be accessible to you. Additionally, there are lots of conferences you can attend. One that's coming up in August, it's the FEEFHS, the Foundation for Eastern European Family History Studies. That is one conference that's really helpful. They talk a lot about German research, and there's so many conferences like that that you can attend that will help you once you start getting into records in Germany. So don't feel like you need to be an expert, but do the research and look into the resources that are available to you so you can actually trace your ancestors back to Germany. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much.